You think 1950s British housewives relied on Marguerite Patten cookbooks for every meal? Think again. Most dinners came straight from memory, passed down through generations who survived wartime rationing without a single written recipe. Modern chefs now call these techniques pure genius. Let's dig into 30 British meals that 1950s housewives made without recipes, dishes that have quietly vanished from family tables across Britain. Bread and milk was the ultimate British comfort food mothers made for sick children without consulting any recipe. This simple dish required nothing more than torn bread in a bowl, covered with warm milk, butter, and a sprinkle of sugar. The bread softened into something between soup and porridge, gentle on upset stomachs. Housewives learned this from their own mothers during childhood illnesses. The warm milk soothed sore throats, while the butter added richness. Children who grew up eating it during measles remembered the taste decades later as maternal love in a bowl. Today, bread and milk has vanished from British tables. Welsh rarebit was a weeknight staple housewives assembled in minutes without measuring. Sharp cheddar was melted with butter, ale, mustard, and Worcestershire sauce until glossy. The molten mixture was poured over toast and grilled until bubbling golden. When grocery budgets stretched thin, this dish appeared on tables across Britain. Housewives made the sauce by feel, knowing exactly when it reached proper consistency. Welsh rarebit represented practical cooking at its finest, turning humble ingredients into something far richer than its origins suggested. This quick supper has quietly faded from modern kitchens. Kedgeree transformed leftover rice and smoked haddock into a fragrant breakfast made without written instructions. The fish was flaked and folded into rice with hard-boiled eggs, curry powder, and butter until golden and aromatic. Housewives learned the technique from mothers who adapted the dish from colonial India. The dish stretched expensive fish into enough breakfast for a hungry family. Kedgeree appeared on sideboards across Britain throughout the 50s. This Anglo-Indian classic has largely disappeared from family breakfast tables. Kippers with bread and butter was a simple breakfast that housewives prepared by grilling smoked herring until the skin crisped and the flesh turned golden. The fish was served with thick slices of buttered bread to soak up the oily juices. Families loved the smoky, salty richness that filled kitchens with an unmistakable aroma each morning. Kippers cost less than bacon and provided protein that kept workers satisfied until midday. Housewives knew by the smell when they were perfectly done. This breakfast represented the practical wisdom of British coastal communities. Kippers have quietly vanished from most modern breakfast tables. Porridge with golden syrup was the winter breakfast across Britain, made by simmering oats in water or milk until thick and creamy. Housewives knew by sight when the oats reached the proper consistency, stirring steadily to prevent sticking. A generous swirl of Lyle's golden syrup added the sweetness children adored. Scottish housewives used coarser oats and a pinch of salt, while English families preferred their porridge sweeter. The technique passed through generations without any written instructions. Porridge represented the frugal wisdom of making something deeply satisfying from the simplest grain. Bubble and squeak transformed Sunday's leftovers into Monday's dinner through a technique every housewife knew by heart. Mashed potatoes were mixed with cooked cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and whatever else remained, then fried in dripping until crispy and golden. The mixture was pressed flat in a hot pan and left undisturbed until the bottom formed a crackling crust. Children loved the contrast between a crispy exterior and a soft interior. The name came from the sounds the cabbage made as it cooked. Some housewives added leftover meat, while others kept it vegetarian. This dish ensured nothing from Sunday's roast went to waste. Bubble and squeak has largely faded from weekly meal rotations. Toad in the Hole was a weeknight dinner that housewives made by nestling sausages into Yorkshire pudding batter, then baking until puffed and golden. The batter was mixed from flour, eggs, and milk in proportions learned by watching mothers work. Housewives knew the fat needed to be smoking hot before the batter was poured. Served with onion gravy, this dish stretched a few sausages into enough dinner for a family of 5. The technique required no recipe because the proportions were learned through repetition. Toad in the hole represented the ingenuity of making cheap sausages feel like celebration. Cottage pie appeared when Sunday's roast beef needed stretching through the week. Housewives minced the leftover meat and simmered it with onions, carrots, and gravy until rich and thick. Mashed potatoes were spread across the top and forked into peaks that crisped golden in the oven. Every family had their version, with proportions adjusted to however much meat remained. Children ate it eagerly, never realizing they were eating transformed leftovers. Shepherd's pie followed the same technique with lamb. Both dishes represented the waste-nothing philosophy that defined post-war British kitchens. Lancashire hot pot was a one-pot supper. Housewives assembled it by layering lamb chops, onions, and kidneys in a deep dish, then topping everything with overlapping slices of potato. The dish baked slowly for hours, the potatoes turning crispy on top while absorbing rich lamb juices below. Housewives knew from experience how much liquid to add, and when the meat was tender enough. This regional classic fed large families from one pot. The technique passed from mother to daughter across generations in Lancashire and beyond. Lancashire hot pot has quietly disappeared from regular family suppers. Corned beef hash was a midweek staple that housewives made by chopping tinned corned beef and frying it with diced potatoes and onions until everything crisped at the edges. The dish came together in one pan using ingredients every pantry stocked. Corned beef had become essential during rationing and remained a budget-friendly protein through the 50s. Some housewives added a fried egg on top, the runny yolk becoming sauce for the hash beneath. This dish could be made in minutes when payday was still days away. Corned beef hash has largely vanished from modern family cooking. Fish pie was a Friday tradition, assembled by housewives who combined flaked white fish with prawns or smoked haddock in a parsley sauce, then topped everything with mashed potato. The sauce was made from butter, flour, and milk, in proportions learned by watching mothers work. Hard-boiled eggs were often nestled into the filling for extra protein. The pie baked until the potato turned golden and the sauce bubbled at the edges. Fish pie stretched modest amounts of fish into enough supper for hungry families. Catholic households made it every Friday during Lent. Fish cakes transformed leftover mashed potato and any cooked fish into crispy patties that children requested by name. Housewives mixed flaked fish with cold potato, added an egg for binding, and shaped the mixture into rounds before coating in breadcrumbs and frying until golden. Some added parsley or a squeeze of lemon, while others kept them simple. This dish represented the practical wisdom of using every scrap of expensive fish rather than letting it spoil. Fish cakes have largely disappeared from homemade family cooking. Spam fritters were a tea-time treat housewives made by slicing tinned meat, dipping it in batter, and deep frying until golden and crispy. The batter transformed the soft pink meat into something crunchy and satisfying. Children loved the combination of a crispy exterior and a tender interior. Spam had become essential during wartime rationing and remained popular through the 50s. Served with chips and mushy peas, spam fritters felt almost indulgent. This dish has quietly faded from modern British tables. Cheese and potato pie was comfort food housewives assembled by layering sliced potatoes with grated cheese and onions, then baking until bubbling and golden. Milk was poured over before the dish went in the oven, creating a creamy sauce as everything cooked together. This dish cost almost nothing yet delivered satisfaction that felt much more luxurious than its humble ingredients suggested. Cheese and potato pie appeared on tables across northern England throughout the decade. Liver and onions was a weeknight supper housewives made by slicing lamb's liver thin and frying it with caramelized onions in bacon dripping. The liver was dredged in seasoned flour before cooking, creating a golden crust that gave way to a tender pink interior. Rich gravy was made in the same pan using the cooking juices. Served with mashed potatoes, this dish provided the iron that growing children needed. The technique required no recipe because mothers stood beside daughters, teaching the timing that prevented rubbery liver. This nutritious supper has largely vanished from family tables. Bangers and mash was the ultimate British comfort food, needing nothing more than sausages, potatoes, and proper onion gravy. The sausages were cooked until golden brown. The mash was beaten with butter and milk until fluffy. The gravy was made in the sausage pan, using the rendered fat and drippings. Every element was made by feel rather than measurement. The name bangers came from wartime sausages that exploded when cooked because of their high water content. This dish remains beloved, but it is now rarely made with proper homemade gravy. Steak and kidney pie was a Sunday dinner housewives assembled by simmering chunks of beef and kidney in rich gravy until fork tender, then topping everything with homemade short crust pastry. The filling was seasoned with thyme and bay, and the pie baked until the crust turned golden, and the filling bubbled through slashes in the top. This dish stretched modest amounts of beef by adding economical kidney for richness. Steak and kidney pie appeared on Sunday tables and in pub lunches throughout the 50s. Faggots with peas pudding was a traditional dish. Housewives made it by combining minced pig's liver, heart, and belly with breadcrumbs and onions, then forming the mixture into balls and baking them in a rich gravy. Peas pudding was made by boiling split peas until soft, then mashing them with butter and seasoning. These dishes represented the nose-to-tail eating that defined British cooking before convenience foods arrived. This traditional combination has largely disappeared from family cooking. Tripe and onions was a dish that divided families, but appeared regularly on tables across northern England. The honeycomb-textured stomach lining was simmered with onions and milk until tender, creating a dish that children either loved or refused entirely. Served with bread to soak up the milky sauce, this dish provided protein at minimal cost. Tripe and onions has almost completely disappeared from British cooking. Boiled beef and carrots was a midweek supper that housewives made by simmering salted beef with root vegetables until everything was tender and infused with savory broth. Dumplings, made from flour and suet, were dropped into the simmering liquid during the final 20 minutes. The cooking broth became soup for the next day. This dish represented the practical wisdom of extracting maximum nourishment from affordable cuts. Boiled beef and carrots has quietly vanished from family suppers. Peas pudding was a side dish housewives made by boiling dried split peas until completely soft, then mashing them with butter, salt, and pepper until smooth. Traditionally, the pudding was tied in a cloth and cooked alongside boiled ham or bacon. Its earthy, comforting flavor paired perfectly with salty cured meats. This humble dish has largely faded from modern cooking. Bread and butter pudding was a dessert housewives made from stale bread that would otherwise be wasted. Buttered slices were layered in a dish with raisins and sultanas, then covered with egg custard sweetened with sugar and flavored with nutmeg. The pudding baked until puffed and golden, the top forming a crispy crust, while the inside remained custardy. Served with custard poured over, bread and butter pudding represented the waste-nothing philosophy of post-war kitchens. This clever dessert has quietly disappeared from regular family baking. Spotted dick was a steamed suet pudding dotted with currants that housewives made by mixing flour, suet, sugar, and dried fruit, then steaming the mixture in a cloth or basin for hours. The name came from the spots of fruit visible throughout the pale dough. Served with hot custard, spotted dick was comfort itself on cold winter evenings. Children loved counting the currants and fought over the crustiest edges. Spotted dick represented the tradition of British puddings that turned simple ingredients into something special. Treacle tart was a dessert housewives made by filling short crust pastry with golden syrup mixed with breadcrumbs and lemon juice. The filling set into something sweet, sticky, and utterly Moorish. The tart baked until the filling turned golden and the pastry crisped at the edges. Treacle tart cost pennies to make, yet satisfied sweet cravings completely. This traditional British dessert has faded from regular family baking. Rice pudding was a simple dessert. Housewives made by baking rice in sweetened milk with a knob of butter until thick and creamy. A brown skin formed on top that some loved and others pushed aside. Housewives knew it was done by gently jiggling the dish when the pudding was set but still soft inside. Nutmeg was grated over before baking. Rice pudding appeared at school dinners and family suppers throughout the 50s. This comforting pudding has largely disappeared from homemade family cooking. Jam roly-poly was a steamed pudding housewives made by spreading jam over suet pastry, rolling it into a log, and steaming until tender. The jam oozed through the spiraling layers, creating bursts of sweetness with every slice. Served with hot custard, this pudding warmed families through cold winters. Jam roly-poly represented the British tradition of transforming flour, fat, and jam into celebration. Rhubarb crumble was a pudding housewives assembled by topping stewed rhubarb with a buttery crumble mixture of flour, sugar, and butter rubbed together until resembling breadcrumbs. The crumble baked until golden and crisp on top, while the fruit bubbled beneath. Rhubarb grew abundantly in back gardens across Britain, and this pudding used the seasonal glut wisely. Served with custard or cream, rhubarb crumble delivered tartness and sweetness in perfect balance. The technique required no recipe because proportions were learned by feel. Semolina pudding was a simple dessert, made by cooking semolina in milk with sugar until thick and creamy. A dollop of jam was stirred through when serving, turning the pale pudding pink and sweet. It appeared on school dinners and family suppers throughout the 1950s, providing comfort at minimal cost. Semolina pudding has quietly vanished from most modern kitchens, replaced by ready-made desserts. Custard from scratch was something every housewife made by whisking eggs, sugar, and vanilla into warm milk, then stirring over gentle heat until thick enough to coat a spoon. The technique required constant attention and knowledge of when the custard was about to curdle. Housewives learned this from their mothers, standing beside them at the stove until the feel became instinct. Proper custard poured over any pudding transformed it into something special. This technique has largely disappeared from everyday cooking. Which forgotten British meal would you bring back to your family table? Share your memories in the comments. Hit the like button if this took you back, and subscribe so you never miss another trip down memory lane.